Hi, today I want to talk with you about spinal articulation exercises like the roll up, the teaser, neck pull, short spine, shoulder bridge, other ones that have spinal articulation that many of us are taught to have an imprint of the lower back, the lumbar spine. I disagree with imprinting the lumbar spine because I believe it doesn't strengthen our back muscles. Now, the work we do in the vertical workshop is actually primarily about strengthening your low back muscles from a very efficient way of making a low abdominal or your deeper low abdominal connection, which makes an incredible tension, lateral tension on your thoracolumbar fascia, which then lets your back muscles be really efficient. I should put efficient in quotes, because there's a lot of things that go into what it means to be efficient. But with that, we've got to get our back muscles strong in order for our lumbar spine to be supple and for it to not be hurting so much. There's a whole way of going about that, and that's exactly what the vertical workshop is about. But I want to share with you this anti-imprint of your lumbar spine. Now, it's not easy, but it is very important in terms of strengthening. And it is not what I was originally taught, but it is what I understand from all of my efforts in the world of biomechanics and functional anatomy. So with that, when we do the roll up, let's go with the roll up. That's a handy one, because that's where we're first usually taught this imprint that I disagree with so strongly. As you roll up, right here, my pelvis is neutral. I want to keep my pelvis neutral as long as possible and roll up into flexion. Right here, my pelvis is still neutral, but my lumbar spine is flexed along with the rest of my body. When I then start to come forward, it's a stable spine and a mobile pelvis, so that my spine, even though it's moved in space, is stable relative to each joint and relative to the pelvis. Then I roll backwards. Again, it's a movement of the pelvis. My spine is stable with each joint relative to the pelvis until my pelvis is neutral relative to the mat. Hip points and pubic bone level with the mat. And then I keep it neutral and articulate my spine out to its natural curves. So my lumbar spine is flexed only for the parts, or rather my lumbar spine is flexed until my pelvis is neutral. Then I articulate out into its natural curves. Will it hit the mat? Will my lumbar spine touch the mat? Yeah, sure, it'll probably graze the mat, especially I've got a nice soft mat here. The harder your mat is, the less pressure of your lumbar spine will be into the mat because of the cushion. But with it, it's articulate your spine up into flexion rather than push it back into flexion. And then when you roll back, it's reach your spine out into its natural curves. So again, I keep a stable, level, neutral pelvis relative to this mat and then roll up into flexion. So the temptation is to tuck your pelvis and push your lumbar spine in. I get it. It feels strong, but it's not strong. So instead, as you roll up, you have to work to keep that level pelvis. Then you rotate forward on your pelvis, roll your pelvis back again until it's neutral, and then articulate out to natural curves. Now, it's so hard, but there's a great tool that we have for this, and that's using your rollback bar. So I've got my rollback bar hooked really high up, and I know that you can't see it right now because I'm using this direction of the camera so that we could post it here. But I've got it hooked up high on my Cadillac, and if you are using balanced body springs, use the short yellow. We want springs that can support our clients when they are using the rollback bar. So whether I start in natural curves, which would mimic the neck pull, or lightly flexed, which mimics the roll up, so I'll go with that one. Once I go backwards, I'm keeping stable spine, even though it's moving in space, it's stable relative to my pelvis. I really moved my pelvis. Now my pelvis is neutral to the mat, and see how these springs are holding me up? That way I can take care to now articulate out rather than compress back. Same thing here. I can let the springs support me as I work a level neutral pelvis, and I articulate my spine up. So now I'm in flexion, but my pelvis is still neutral to the mat. And then I can come forward. Come all the way onto your sit bones. If you have tight hamstrings, you're gonna have to bend your knees. and then I could go again, do the same thing. If you did the neck pull version, you tip your pelvis and spine back, keeping natural curves. Then as you continue to tip your pelvis, you allow yourself to go into flexion, but I get my pelvis neutral to the mat, and I articulate out rather than imprint my lumbar spine. Same thing on the way up, articulate up into flexion rather than push back, and then roll your pelvis forward, come on top of your sit bones, even if you have to bend your knees, and lift tall again. So the concept of not pressing your low back into the mat is really pretty powerful. It's going to help strengthen your low back muscles, which are actually attached to your sacrum. So to keep that neutral pelvis when you roll up into flexion, that takes a lot of lumbar muscles in order to be able to stabilize that pelvis. And then you actually purposefully mobilize it. Now, where do we see this again? Of course, we see this in any spinal articulation exercise. It would even be in spine stretch forward that when you roll up, you're not imprinting your low back. Now, if you stick a pole there and you say press your low back into that, I caution you on that, because that's not actually strengthening your back muscles the way that we really want to. And I know that in Pilates we say, relax your back muscles. They're hurting you and they're tight. They need to rest and be stretched. But that's not actually the truth of what we need to have done to our back muscles. We need to strengthen them efficiently. And that takes this really interesting tension on your thoracolumbar fascia. Email me at info@theverticalworkshop.com and let's work on that. But when you roll up into natural curves rather than roll back and imprint your lumbar spine. We find it also, as I was saying, in the neck pull. Can you keep a level pelvis as you lift your head and chest up and you come up into your flexion? Roll forward, articulate up into natural curves. Tip back with your pelvis in natural curves. Keep tipping your pelvis as you get to flexion. You get to your level pelvis, and then you keep it level as you articulate your spine out. It's the same thing for teaser, that as you set up, you keep your level pelvis and natural low back curve, and instead of pushing back with your pelvis, you roll up into your flexion of your spine and the posterior tilt. And then when I roll back, I'm going to roll my pelvis neutral to the mat and then articulate my spine back, just like other exercises that we just talked about. Here's another one, shoulder bridge preparation. I'll take my hands out of the way, or this hand out of the way so you can see. When you roll up, okay, here we are. When you roll back down, there's no need to imprint your low back. You just articulate your thoracic spine, articulate your lumbar spine. It'll feel like it has to really reach forward to get then your sacrum, the back of your pelvis, to be in the mat. But there's no need to bear your low back into the mat. Why would we ever want to really force your low back backwards against a hard or slightly soft mat and place? And then with that forces your discs back into your ligaments, and then also forces those discs then against, possibly against your nerve endings. So why would you ever want to do that? I know you've been taught to do that. I was taught to do that, but at some point we really have to critically think and say, is this really achieving the goal that we want? Is this really helping us out the way that we want to? So play this thing over and over again and see if you could roll your spine up to maintaining a level pelvis. Come up into flexion. Keep that shape of your spine relative to your pelvis and come forward on top of your sit bones. Bend those knees if you need to. Then roll your pelvis backwards, keeping your stable spine, and then get your level pelvis, articulate out into natural curves. It's not going to happen right away, and that's why the roll back bar really, really helps. So use that whichever version you do, round or natural curves at first. Roll backwards, let your hips slide, get to a level pelvis. Articulate your spine out and then roll back up. Keep a level pelvis until you're in your full flexion, and then continue forward into the rest of the exercise. So play with that. Reach out with questions. I will always want to explain it to you if you need more explanation. I encourage you to critically think rather than blindly accept. All right, thank you. Info@theverticalworkshop.com.